want to do a little dance now, just to get the blood going. There we go, there we go, there we go. That's it. Moves like Jagger.
Good morning, guys, and thanks a lot for the opportunity that I can speak to you about ESG and the unique challenges and opportunities it presents, I think, to us as the industry, and specifically globally as well. Thank you also for that kind introduction, and thank you. I'm very grateful that they utilized the photo just pre-lockdown. As you can see, since then we've had a pandemic, and we've also had a lockdown hairstyle, which I'm struggling to get out of. But it's really fantastic to be here today, and I must say, just to see everyone in person and just see the intermediaries, where I believe it's about sound advice, and to see everyone together and share a podium together is fantastic. So thanks a lot from my side. I'm going to dive straight into the topic, and often I think when you see kind of ESG, you think like, what is ESG actually all about? And I'm going to try and decipher it quite simply, is that I'm sure a lot of you, when you even look through the agenda, thought like, should we Google this and see what ESG is actually all about? And very, very simplistically, it basically lives under these three pillars: environmental, the social, and the governance impact. And I can tell you is that these things you might think is not relevant for us today, and we can ignore them and kind of leave them for the next generation to deal with. But the impact of ignoring kind of environmental, social, and governance things are dramatic. And I think will have a massive impact, not just in the industry today, but even more dramatic for the industry in 10 to 20 years to come. So I thought there's no better way to illustrate this to you, to show you a video clip to say that if we had to turn our back as an industry, I think as a country, globally, just as a society, on these three important elements, what will the world look like? And I'll show you what the world looks like today, and then in your own mind just think, what will the world look like 20, 30 years from now if we completely ignore this? Devastating, I think, impact as you go through this video and just look at some of the impacts one of these things are having. The reality is that we're all together here today that we can either ignore these things and completely think like it's not our responsibility, or everyone in this room collectively as an industry and as an intermediary, can kind of get together and say, how do we overcome some of these risks, and how can we make a difference, in the specific kind of spaces that we move in. Here's some of the risks, kind of if you project it forward over the next 10 years, in the different buckets. You can see in the environmental one, climate change or the failure of climate change. You've seen some of those things, deforestation, how it's changing kind of globally, just how the icebergs are melting. What are we doing about that as an industry? At least understand these risks and provide the type of services and products to our clients out there that can help them prevent against this. Extreme weather, I'm going to show you one slide now on the KZN kind of just catastrophe. That was kind of the Hurricane Ian in one of those videos that's currently moved through Florida, in Naples, wiping out massive areas of a kind of a first world country. Biodiversity losses, then when you get to things like social cohesion, likelihood kind of crises, infectious diseases. You've seen in the previous presentations the impact of COVID-19, what that has had on society. And I think specifically for us in the short-term insurance industry, but in the insurance industry in general, there's an impact when it comes to claims. But when you look at what the impact it has on specific individuals out there, on human beings out there, the impact is dramatic. We are seeing it through the health data now. Mental illnesses has been higher than it's ever been before. And how do you help navigate your clients through this world and make them understand, the risks that they sit with, that they might not even know about today? The environmental changes, natural resources, how that is getting depleted at a rapid rate. The impact of COVID has kind of accelerated that. And then this debt crisis. If you read kind of the news today, you'll see that the US is talking about an 8% inflation rate, something that's almost unheard of in the US. I think if you look towards the UK, some of the similar challenges that they're sitting with. And then when you get to kind of a third world country like South Africa, it's even more amplified. But in all of this, I believe, lies specific challenges. And how do we design products? How do we design smart advice? How do we get people, to kind of engage through relationships and navigate a very, very complex world out there and help our clients through it? Just very briefly on COVID-19, we have seen this massive impact on the supply chain, specifically in the short-term insurance space. At the point of time in 2021, we had more than 350,000 kind of containers just standing idle. It had this rapid increase, up to 500% increase in kind of shipping cost of containers moving from China to South Africa, which had a ripple effect through the motor industry, specifically around the inflation impact that had. It resulted in kind of shortage of car parts, longer delays when it comes to kind of repairing vehicles, pushed up second vehicle prices, shortage of microchips, the impact on industry around steel, and how the steel prices has all of a sudden just creeped up. But I think importantly as well is that it creates this almost disparity in society, is that the rich is getting more rich and the poor is almost getting more poor. And if you look at some of the statistics here, despite kind of the global effort to get people vaccinated, when you look at the 52 poorest countries in the world, only 6% of those people eventually, got vaccinated. If you then look further and say, like, how do people recover out of that? 20% of the world's population would have recovered half of their debt or half of their losses by the next year in 2021. But when you look at the flip side, is that the poorest 20% would have lost, 5% more of their income. So even in a worse position than they were in. And then you project this forward and you see that by 2030, about 51 million more people are projected to be in extreme poverty and living in those conditions. And that is the society we live in today, and how kind of just is this relevant in our industry? When you look at things like geopolitical tension leading to global divergence, I think it's important, a lot of those things I've showed up front, the ESGs, it takes a collective effort of industry, countries to get together to solve some of those. If you look at the global crisis on global warming, how do people get together and start making an impact on that? The reality is of where we sit today is that we have a war in Russia. Kind of 2 days ago, North Korea has shot a missile over Japan. And when you look at kind of the globe, they're almost sitting on this knife edge, is that the environment out there is super, super tough. But I think we've got a responsibility to say that how do we as an industry start doing something locally, where we can make a difference. And the reality is, and the point I made is that it makes it very, very difficult for people often to take out of the issues they're dealing with today and start thinking, how do we actually have a positive hat on and start navigating through this. What is the impact of ESG then in South Africa? And I think, again, you've seen some of these things. We have seen a massive change in kind of weather patterns. This year compared to the last year, 16 severe weather events per month in 2022, about double of what you normally see in a normal year. And some of the most devastating impacts in the KZN floods projected to cost the industry about 17 billion. And how does the insurance industry kind of react to that? And I think more importantly, that is behind us. How do we start projecting and thinking, what is the next kind of disaster that's coming? And how do we prepare for that? And how do we prepare our clients for that? When you come to weather patterns, it's very, very interesting is that, kind of internally we had a joke the other day to say that we have literally all become weather experts. But if you look at El Nino and the kind of the southern oscillation, it's really a pattern. And how do you as an insurer, how do you as a broker try and start understanding these patterns? For those of you that's not close to it, is that there's basically two cycles, a La Nina and an El Nino. La Nina is when it rains too much, and El Nino is the opposite, when there's complete drought, like what we have in the Western Cape, a few years ago. The fascinating thing is, when you look at the data and you go back in time, it's actually very predictable. It comes off basically just the surface temperature in the Pacific Ocean, and that determines these cycles that you will have. And they typically run in kind of a 2-year cycle. 2 years of lots of rain, kind of La Nina, 2 years of extreme drought. And we have a phenomenon at the moment is that we're going into a 3rd year of a rainy season, La Nina. And this occurs kind of every 50 years. You have this outlier. And that is what we're dealing with now. What does this mean? What does it mean to the industry is that not only that when it rains more, you have kind of more damage, but the following years, because of the additional vegetation, there's more fire risks when it comes to the El Nino periods. And we believe that as an industry understanding this, it will have a swing of between 1.3 to 6.1%, in loss ratios. And how do you navigate that, and how do you kind of prepare the industry for that? When you look at just the local environment, post-COVID, not being maintained, some of the infrastructure, we started seeing is that by looking at our driving data, roughly 50,000 potholes started developing in Johannesburg. And what is the impact that has on accidents, on claims, and our community in general? At the same time, there's absolute increase in fires, driven by some of those weather pattern changes. But I think more importantly, direct correlation to load shedding and how that, at the back of a load shedding cycle often creates some of these fire claims. And I think there's a lot of information around this, but just say that firstly is just on potholes, we believe that 31% increase in the cost of potholes for the industry, 115% increase in the cost of fire claims over the last year. Then when you carry on, if you look at the inflationary increases specifically on parts, and you take every single motor manufacturer, it has, in many cases, almost been 4 times higher when you just look at the import cycle, and without exceptions. And then the cost of inflation when it comes to second-hand vehicles, because of the supply and demand issue, again, is that you just cannot find the data anywhere when we've looked, is that second-hand vehicles for the first time is actually increasing in pricing. And what does that impact? How do you insure those assets? What does it mean for salvage? What does it mean for the consumer out there? And then finally, just on kind of load shedding, direct correlation, if we take kind of the load shedding schedules and you compare it to the claims that gets locked on days, direct correlation, in that. And how are your clients insured for that, and how do you navigate again, through that very, very complex world? And then if you look kind of just into some of the future risks, is that we can see in developed countries, and it's coming to South Africa, is like we're not a sole entity, is that there will be a lot more coming down the line. You've seen every single thing today was about technology. How do we embrace technology more? How technology is taking off. And you see things like cyber insurance and the cyber risks that it covers. South Africa at the moment is kind of behind the curve. There's some things moving. The National Cybersecurity Framework Policy has been passed in 2015. I think you're all very familiar with, POPI and how do we protect our clients' data. But all of these things, as important as there is, there's kind of a layer of complexity that adds on top of what you do today, as an intermediary. And I think, why do I mention all of these things to you is that you can kind of pause for a moment and say it's a bleak picture, but I believe it provides unique opportunities for us as an industry, to come up with very, very different solutions. And the first one is that, and I want to challenge you as intermediaries today and a lot of the other insurers out here in the market, it shouldn't take a pandemic, to come up with new insurance products. Is that how hard are you pushing your insurers? And how do you design products that is relevant to your clients? If the second-hand vehicle pricing is increasing massively, you need something that's almost like a retail value booster. Do you have comprehensive cyber insurance when these risks are going to start hitting in 5 to 10 years to come? How are your clients protected for power surge if there's a total grid failure? We've just come off the back of business interruption cover. And then I believe that the entire world is shifting towards where people want to consume insurance kind of as they use it. And the whole mobility and how do you build products for mobility and when you use it, I believe that wave is coming, and how do you develop unique products and arm your clients with these products as they come along. And then maybe just one point specifically around society. A lot of times we say that it's not our problem, it's government's problem to solve these issues. I can tell you it's never been more relevant for corporates and collectively in this room that we take hands and that private and government starts working together. And when you look at some of the data, and I've just singled out 2 initiatives that we've been involved in, we had to post-COVID say that, how do we make a difference when it comes to the potholes, one of the things I mentioned. And we started, in partnership with Dial Direct, this pothole patrol, where we now fixed 112,000 potholes, basically in the Johannesburg region, and we are still going strong every single day. But I think the impact to society is massive. Secondly is that if a client has a fire, I believe every client should have the ability, to get someone out and basically help them to put that fire out. And a private initiative through Fire Force to try and get to our clients. But the key thing to me is that I think we work on a model kind of at Discovery, a shared value model, where we say that how do you select risks up front? But more importantly, how do you make people more aware, as advisors as well, around the risks that they take on? And how do you change this behavior? And if you look at, for example, how do you change people's driving behavior? In South Africa, every single year, there's between 15 to 16,000 road fatalities. And how can you make an impact to just save a few of those accidents every year and the impact that has on society and on those families that's involved in that? And I think many of these initiatives speak to them. I'll kind of just point out one last one is that when COVID-19 hit, I think the entire world was scared. And initially, people kind of ignored it. And then you realize, but this thing is a real pandemic and it's coming. And you could either put your head in the sand, or you could say, how do we collectively as an industry kind of put our hands up and say, how do we work with government, to make this better for South Africa and for the whole world. In our space at the time, we started these COVID-19 vaccine sites. It was one of the most difficult tasks to actually just secure the vaccine. To get the whole supply chain around that, how you keep it cool, et cetera, et cetera. We rolled out 9 vaccine sites, employed just over 1,000 people to do it. And in the time, kind of vaccinated, 1.3 million people with the vaccine. And the whole intention there was that, how do we get people, and society back? And how do we get the economy to recover quicker? Because if you have a healthy economy, it creates jobs. If you have more jobs, it does a lot of those things that you've seen in ECG, and it deals with a lot of those elements that I've pointed out. And I want to end off with this to say that, it's like people often ask, but what is the role of the intermediary? And they often ask those questions when you live in this perfect world where the external environment is great, and people then say, but do I really need an intermediary because, everything is so easy? I can tell you is that it has never been more relevant to have an intermediary than today. When you have a complex environment out there, and the things I've shared with you just now, and navigating the complex environment, and making your clients believe that there's a better world out there, there's better products, and the sound advice you can provide, your role has never been more kind of relevant. And whether that is by utilizing technology, building relationships, pushing the industry for better products, the time is now for you, I think, to act on that. Understand that in difficult times is when we can actually move ahead. And when as an advisor and an intermediary, you can play a dramatic role. So just quickly to end off is that we ask clients a very, very simple question to say that, why do you need a broker? And 48% of them say through a recent Deloitte study is that they want to find the best cover for their needs. Now, it's very hard as it is. It's complex products out there. And when you take an external environment, as I've just explained to you, is that what is the best cover? And you need a specialist in the field to help clients navigate through that. 42% want to have a trusted advisor. You know, when times are tough, they want to go to someone to say that, I trust you with my entire life, and I know that you're going to take care of me. But you need to understand the covers then, you need to understand the products and what's available in the market. 42% want to save time on buying and managing insurance, and the whole, we spoke about the journey today, making the journey easier. But when it's tough times, often people look at their own industry, at their own businesses, and say that this is hard enough to navigate. When it comes to insurance, I want to hand it off to someone that can help me through this. And that is the role, I believe, of the intermediary. A PwC study shows specifically for companies, what is your biggest concern right now? And the number one priority for basically companies is emerging risks that come out of a lot of the things I've shown you earlier. Cyber insurance. What is the next big kind of black swan that is going to hit us? And how do we prepare for that, you know, when that eventuality hits? There's many tools, I think, that's available to the broker today. And I challenge you, embrace those. You know, take the data that's available out there. When it comes to kind of geographical underwriting data, there's amazing new technology that can scan a DB board, as an example, and show you certain high-risk areas and hotspots. And all of this will become more consumable in your hand. But you need to embrace that as part of your journey to utilize it. So just to end off and to summarize, I think when you look at the impact of ESG risks globally, this is not going away. When you fast forward 10 years from now, these things will become even more relevant. The impact of COVID has forced us to move ahead in some industries at a rapid pace, but it's also left us behind when it comes to society and how often, you know, kind of people take time to recover. The geopolitical landscape out there is complex, you know, but let's take hands and kind of move forward and see how do we make a difference in the specific local areas that we move in. When you look at South Africa, severe weather conditions, car parts inflations, load shedding impact, you know, low cyber security governance, but it creates the opportunity to have new products out there that you can provide to your clients. And I think just to end off is that, what do you do about it? It's like, how do you just take what's always been available out there in the market? Or do you challenge yourself, your colleagues, and the insurance industry and to say that, let's introduce more innovative products to cover these risks for today. How do we offer a relevant cover to our clients? How do we collaborate more with governments? Because quite frankly, the challenges of ECGs are too big, you know, for a single player, I think, to solve. How do we come together as an entire industry, including governments? And then finally is that the time has never been better to be an intermediary than now. And take that responsibility, you know, and provide the client you can for your cover, for your clients. Thanks a lot for your time. I hope it gave you a flavor of ESG, and I'm really grateful that I could share that with you. And thanks again for your turnout and your ongoing support.